Today we're talking about another extravagant, all-over-the-place fairy tale by Madame d'Aulnoy, the woman who coined the term, called Gracieuse and Percinet. The main character's name is actually supposed to sound like this.
Gracieuse.
But I'm American, and I'll do my best. So a king and queen have the most beautiful princess in the world, and her name is Gracieuse, and it means, like, graceful. Even though she's, like, the most beautiful, she's not proud, and she's humble, and just everything a princess should be. Well, our antagonist in the story is a very rich old maid named Duchess Grognon. The author goes into huge detail about how ugly this woman is. Her face was of an alarming size, covered with pimples. Her mouth was so large you would have said she could eat everybody up, but she had no teeth. She also has a hump in front and back and limps with both legs. Anyway, she's so sick of hearing about how beautiful the princess is, she leaves court to go live in her own mansion. Well, eventually the queen falls ill and dies, and the dad is so sad about it that his advisors are like, go out and go hunting to feel better. Well, he goes out and he comes across the mansion of this Duchess Grognon. She invites him in, and then she shows him all of her freaking money. She's got barrels and barrels of gold, and in very French fashion, the story goes into all this detail about all these amazing fine wines she has. And it says the king, who loved money beyond anything, said, I will marry you tomorrow for your money. She says, well, I'll only marry you if you let me be in control of your daughter as if I were her mother. And he's like, sure, do what you want with her. So Gracieuse is horrified. She goes to her nurse and she's like, how can I deal with this horrible woman who hates me, who tells everyone she hates me, sleeping in my mother's bed? But the nurse says, princesses like you of noble birth need to set a good example for people. You need to be obedient to your father and sacrifice yourself to please him. Those are her words. And they're clearly the words of Madame d'Aulnoy to her audience of upper-class girls. You're noble, you have to set the example. Be good. So when the dad brings her home to be the queen, Gracieuse is supposed to come out in a big procession and meet them. That's when this strange dude, Percinet, shows up and he talks to her. She's like, I don't know you. Are you one of my new stepmother's pages? And he says, no, I am yours and will always be yours only. She again says, I don't know you. He says, I haven't made myself known to you yet, but now that you're about to have this horrible stepmom, I thought I needed to let you know I'm here. I am Percinet, I am a prince, and I have been blessed by the fairies. So I've got magic, I've been watching you for a while, like using fairy magic to make himself invisible. The fairy power I was given at my birth has helped me enjoy the great pleasure of beholding you. Not creepy at all. But she's not creeped out. She's like, oh my God, I do not have to worry about my stepmother now because I know you're here to be my friend and you'll be by my side. So they go out and meet the stepmother, but she thinks Gracieus's horse makes her look too beautiful, so she demands they switch horses. But then when she gets on Gracieus's horse, the horse takes off, she falls off, being dragged by her foot in the stirrup over stones and thorns and into a heap of mud where she was almost smothered. It says when the horse stops, she's cut open in 4 or 5 places and has a broken arm. The people, quote, picked her up into pieces like broken glass, put her together, and she goes through with the wedding. And the stepmother Grognon blames our girl. So she has the girl brought to her chambers that night, and she has 4 women tear off all of her fine clothes and start to beat her with rods. And the stepmom watches, saying, flay me that girl and leave her not the least morsel of that white skin she thinks so beautiful. It says that Gracieuse would have wished for Percinet to come save her, but she was naked, and so she was too modest to really wish him there. But from afar, he uses magic to save her. He turns the rods into feathers, and the women think that they're beating all of the flesh off of her body, but they're really just feathers and they're not hurting her at all. So the king throws this tournament to flatter Grognon, where his knights fight for her beauty and people try to challenge her beauty, but they all get beaten by the knights. But then a strange knight shows up and kicks everybody's butt against the queen's beauty. It's Percinet. So in anger and jealousy, Grognon has her abandoned in the woods. She stumbles in the woods, tears her pretty dresses, thinks I'm gonna get eaten by animals or I'm gonna starve, but then Percinet shows up. And the author describes how conflicted this girl feels. She's afraid to be alone with this dude in the woods, this dude who she knows has been watching her and wants her, but she also wants to be saved and likes him. Then she really feels safe because he suddenly has this castle and there's women all around, including his mother. He brings her in and there's like people dancing, playing flutes and bagpipes. On the walls are etchings of her entire life. Like even her coming into the palace is etched on the wall. like what just happened. She's like, oh my God, everything I do ends up sculpted on this wall. And he says, yes, because I don't want to forget anything about you. So they throw her a banquet. Everything's lovely. But then later she's like, I really want to go home to my dad. And he's like, no, stay here. Marry me. Why do you want to do that? And she's like, because I'm a good girl and I belong to my father. I'm accountable to him. Even if he's awful, I need to go home. But he's like, hey, I can magically show you what's going on back there. You want to see? And the way that he shows her is so weird. I suppose my translation could be wonky, but it said he told her to place her foot on his and her little finger in his mouth and then look in the direction of the city. And she immediately could see what was happening. Grognon told her dad she's dead and had a log buried in her place in a casket, like wrapped in her clothes. She's like, I gotta go home and tell my dad I'm alive. And he's like, you're gonna regret this. You are more unmerciful to me than Grognon is to you. Because she won't marry you right now? I don't think so, dude. And he tells her, you will never re-enter this palace until after you are buried. So she goes home, says, surprise, I'm alive. But Grognon claims she's an imposter and starts to give her these impossible tasks. He has to disentangle impossible rope to disentangle, but Percinet helps her. And then he's like, girl, come marry me. And she still says no. She's like, I don't know that you really love me enough. And he's like, all right, you keep being suspicious. I'll help you again next time. And he does. She has to disentangle all these feathers. He helps her. Her last task is to go get this box and bring it back to her without opening it. But like most fairy tale heroines, she does open it, but you'll never guess what's inside. A quantity of little men and women, fiddlers, musical instruments, little tables, cooks, and dishes. In fact, a giant party. So all these tiny people come out of the box and she's like, ooh, what fun. But then she needs to get him back in and she can't get him back in. They don't want to go back in. So she calls on Percinet and he shows up and he's like, oh, if it were not for your wicked stepmother, you'd never even think of me. And she's like, that's not true. I really like you, but also help me right now. So he does, and he gives her a ride home. And the author tells us that she does really love him and she's really starting to trust him, and that he says all sort of tender and respectful things to her on the way home. Finally, her stepmother just orders a big hole dug in the earth, shoves Gracieuse into it, and puts a big rock on top. Like, all right, there. So Gracieuse is like, I guess I'm gonna be buried alive now, but then she sees a light and a little door. She goes through it, and magically she has made her way back to Percinet's fairy palace. Because remember how he said she'd never see it again until she'd been buried? Well, now she's been buried, and so she escapes, and she's with him at his palace. And he says, please refuse me no longer. Please marry me now. His mom even comes in and says, it's time to make my son happy and relieve you from the deplorable life you live under the tyranny of Grognon. And so she finally says yes, accepts him as her husband. They have a giant fairy wedding, but turns out there's this one fairy who has been helping Grognon, giving her the ideas for untangling things and the feathers and stuff. Well, she shows up at the wedding, sees this girl, and she had no idea that was who Grognon was torturing, and apparently the torture was okay, but not if it was her. So she doesn't stay for the banquet, makes her excuses, flies to the king's palace, seeks out Grognon, and wrung her neck before the guards or any of her women could stop her. And that is how the story ends, with this fairy strangling the evil woman. Then there's a whole little poem about how envy is such a terrible sin, how Percinet was wonderful for being faithful and constant, even when she wouldn't marry him right away, and how Gracieuse deserves the crown the gods prepare for all enduring, pure, unselfish love to wear. So basically, don't be envious, or a fairy's gonna come strangle you. Check out my book, Dust Spells, a reimagining of the 12 Dancing Princesses, another fairy tale, and my podcast, Folk Tales and Fairy Lore. Link is in the bio.